right, so this is lesson 2.9. This is talking about square roots and estimating. We are going to be allowed to use a calculator through this lesson. So if you have your calculator with you, awesome. If not, pause the video, go grab that. And we're going to be on pages 19 and 20 in your notes packet for today. So we're going to start off talking about what is a square root. So we're going to talk about squares here, and we're going to talk about finding the area of those squares. And to find the area of the square, you take the length of the side and you multiply it by itself. So since this square has a side of 5, the area would then be 25. Since this square has a side of 7, we'd be doing 7 times 7, so our area would actually be 49. What would the area of this final square be? 9 times 9 for the side, so your area would end up being 81 in that case. So to do this and find the area of the square, we actually multiplied the number by itself. We call this in math class squaring, and we saw that with an exponent. So for example, 5 squared equals 5 times 5, which is really 25. So we've talked about squares before when we did our PEMDAS lesson. This is just kind of a quick little review of that. The other thing with squares is that we can actually go backwards. So if we know the area of a square, we could go back and try and figure out, well, how long would the sides actually have to be? So if I look at this square, the area is 9. These sides would end up both having to be 3 because 3 times 3 is equal to 9. So when we do this and we're working backwards, this is called taking the square root. So squaring and square root are what we call inverse operations. They undo each other, kind of like addition and subtraction undo each other, and multiplication and division undo each other. Squaring and square root are inverse operations. When we talk about square root, we have this little like check mark box thing that goes around the number, and that's our symbol for square root. So the square root of 9, that's how you would read that, is equal to 3. Now, there is something kind of funny that happens with square roots. 3 squared is equal to 9 because 3 times 3. In the past, we also saw this when we did our order of operations lesson, and we said, okay, keep these in the parentheses. -3 times -3 is also equal to 9. So something interesting happens that the square root of 9 can be positive 3, and the square root of 9 could also be -3. So when using our squares, if we're talking about distances, for example, up above when we were using it with the actual physical squares, we would need only the positive version. But it is important to know that the square root of a number is also a negative as well. So, question for you here, what could be the square root of 25? So if we're looking at the square root of 25, this would either be 5 or -5 would be our two possible options here. If you flip it over to page number 20, we're talking about estimating a square root. What we're going to be doing is looking at this chart that goes down the side in your notes packet. And we're going to be trying to figure out, okay, square root of 45, what is this going to fall between? So we are looking, this would be the side that we're using to put our square root numbers on. So 45, if I'm going down this list, would actually be between 36 and 49, because 45 is between them. So the square root of 45 would fall between the square root of 36 and the square root of 49. Square root of 36 would just be 6, and the square root of 49 would be 7. So it's between those two. Square root of 68, if we were to look for 68 on this list, it would go somewhere in between here. So this would be between the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. What numbers are these actually going to be between? So this is going to be your first question right here. This one is 8 because the square root of 64 is 8. What about this one right here? This would be 9 because the square root of 81 is 9. So the square root of 68 is going to be some number between 8 and 9, and it's going to be a decimal number. We can also have negative square roots. So we have 105, and 105 would actually fall here between 100 and 121. So between the square root of 100 and negative square root of 121. So that means that this is between -10 and -11. Down here, you can estimate the location of the square roots on the number line. Square root of 65, this is in between the square root of 64 and 81, and it's really, 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 really close to the square root of 64 because 64 is only 1 away from 65. So that means it's going to be pretty much here, just right above the 8. So we're going to go ahead and give that a label of A. Square root of 45, this is going to be between 36 and 49. It's going to be a little bit closer to the 7 side of things. So 6, 7, 8, I'm going to kind of place it right here and label it B. And C, the square root of 100 is really close to the square root of 100, which would be 10. So I'm going to put it just a little bit to the right and label that one C. In the next part, talking about square roots on your calculator has a square root symbol, which you can go ahead and actually type in. So you're going to type in the square root symbol and then 247. We're going to round to the nearest hundredths place for this one. So for this part, I get 15.72. Go ahead, type this one in, round to the nearest hundredths. I got 7.28. For the next one, square root of 23, type that one in. And I got 4.80 after I rounded. This one, square root of 135, type that in and tell me what your answer is. I got 11.62 after rounding. And the final one here, the square root of 90, type that in. I got 9.49. And that wraps it up for lesson 2.9, which talks about square roots, perfect squares, squaring, and also talking about estimating square roots and using them on your calculator.